I buried my mother in the morning. By the afternoon, my wife decided I was disposable. She waited until the last car left the cemetery. Until my tie was loosened, my hands still smelled like dirt, and my head was ringing from all the polite condolences. Then she stepped in front of me, heels sinking into wet gravel, and said it like she was commenting on the weather. Perfect timing. One less thing to worry about. The envelope hit my chest before the words finished echoing. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I signed the papers on the hood of my car, pen shaking just enough to smear the ink. Black suit, funeral shoes. My mother's dirt still on the cuffs. She watched me sign like she was waiting for a receipt. When I handed the folder back, she smiled. Not relieved. Victorious. And walked away already dialing her lawyer. She never knew what was written in my mother's will. She never knew that the woman she dismissed as simple had quietly left me everything. Every account, every property, every carefully hidden investment. $4.2 million. dollars. And the prenup my wife had insisted, meant she walked away with exactly nothing. Her lawyer laughed when he realized it. Out loud, in the office. But that came later. Back then, standing alone in a cemetery parking lot, I thought I'd just lost the last thing anchoring me. I didn't know I was standing on the edge of something sharp. I was 34, a fourth grade teacher in a forgettable town with cracked sidewalks and underfunded schools. 8 years of teaching kids how to multiply while pretending my paycheck didn't insult me. I loved the classroom, the noise, the chaos, the small victories. I made enough to survive, not enough to impress anyone who counted worth in square footage and engine sounds. My mother never did that. She raised my sister and me alone after my father died when I was 6. 2 jobs, daytime desk work, nighttime cleaning offices that smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. She never complained, never sighed where we could hear it. She just kept moving. And while everyone thought she was barely scraping by, she was doing something else quietly, methodically, patiently. She invested. Small amounts, no risks, no bragging. She bought when things were cheap and held when others panicked. Properties no one wanted. Stocks no one believed in yet. She lived in the same modest house, drove the same aging car, clipped coupons like it was a ritual. Even I didn't know the full picture until the will was read, until the numbers stopped making sense. My wife would have laughed if she'd known. She loved laughing at things she thought were beneath her. I met her at a wedding. She looked expensive without trying. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, worked in luxury real estate, selling homes with wine fridges bigger than my kitchen. She said she didn't care about money. Said it with practiced softness, like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Her family told the truth for her. The first dinner was a performance. Her father asked what I did. When I answered, the air shifted. Her mother repeated my job title like it was a foreign word she didn't approve of. Teaching. She said it slowly, carefully, as if tasting something unpleasant. My wife jumped in fast, talking about my future plans. Administration, advancement, words I hadn't said. I nodded anyway, jaw tight, pretending that version of me existed. Her brother didn't pretend. He bragged. Cars, condos, money he didn't earn. When I mentioned my old sedan, he laughed and called it cute. Like a toy, like a phase. And still, I told myself she was different. She whispered it often enough, that she wasn't like them, that she loved how grounded I was, that my job mattered. I believed her because believing felt easier than noticing the pauses. The way her smile flickered when bills came up, the way silence stretched when she looked at things she wanted. The proposal should have stopped everything. I took her to the park where we first met. Simple, honest. I knelt with a ring I'd saved half a year for. It wasn't large. It was everything I could afford. For half a second, just half, her face betrayed her. The smile stuttered, the eyes recalculated. Then it was gone, replaced by enthusiasm. That moment stayed with me. I just didn't know yet what it was preparing me for. The wedding wasn't planned. It was conquered. Every conversation ended the same way. Me explaining numbers, them explaining status. Her parents wanted a country club spectacle with more people than I'd met in my entire life. I suggested something smaller, something that didn't feel like a corporate launch. We compromised, which meant I nodded while they expanded the guest list past 200. Faces I didn't know. Names I wouldn't remember. Business associates who'd never learn mine. The venue was a mansion that smelled like polished stone and entitlement. The price made my stomach tighten. Her dress alone cost more than the car I drove every day. Everything had to impress someone. I just wasn't sure who. 3 months before the wedding, my mother sat across from me at her kitchen table. Same chipped mug. Same soft voice. She slid an envelope toward me like it weighed nothing. $30,000. I stared at it too long. I told her I couldn't take it. My throat dried saying the words. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just said she wanted me to feel like the wedding was mine too. That I shouldn't feel erased before it even began. I used half of it for the rehearsal dinner and the parts I was expected to handle. I tucked the rest into savings and said nothing. I didn't lie. I just didn't volunteer the truth. Something about silence felt safer. Then the prenup arrived. Dinner? Quiet restaurant? She slid the folder across the table with the same casual confidence she used closing deals. Said it was to protect both of us. Said her parents thought it was smart, business-minded. I read every line while she watched me like time was money. It was clean, clinical, cold. Everything she had stayed hers. Everything she would inherit stayed hers. Her income was insulated, her future protected. Alimony vanished unless a decade passed. Inheritances explicitly separate. The document assumed I was the risk, the variable, the one who might take something that wasn't his. I asked if her parents really thought this was necessary. She smiled and said it was just a formality, that we were forever anyway, that I shouldn't make it weird. I told her I wanted my own lawyer. The air changed instantly. She accused me of distrust, of insulting her family, of complicating things that didn't need complications. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't back down. I found a lawyer through a colleague. Quiet office, tired eyes. He read the document slowly. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said the agreement was written to protect wealthy people from people like me. Then he paused. Said it also protected me more than anyone realized. If she left, I owed her nothing, and anything I inherited would never be hers. That sentence landed heavier than it should have. I signed. She was relieved. Her parents approved. I'd done the right thing. The wedding happened exactly as planned. Applause, champagne, smiles stretched too long. The marriage itself wasn't dramatic at first, just functional. We shared an apartment that made sense on paper. She sold houses. I taught children how to divide fractions. Life moved forward quietly. Then the comments started. Nothing loud, nothing confrontational. Just small remarks slipped between sips of wine. Comparisons disguised as observations. Sighs when she mentioned trips we couldn't take. Houses her clients bought that she lingered on too long. She'd stare at photos on her phone and say nothing, letting the silence speak for her. Sometimes she laughed when she said it. Sometimes she didn't. And every time something tightened in my chest. Slow, patient, waiting. By the second year, her family stopped pretending. Sunday dinners turned into performances where I was the punchline. Her father would lean back, glass in hand, praising her brother's latest promotion or her newest record commission. Then his eyes would drift to me and he'd ask, smiling too thinly, how the alphabet was coming along. Her mother preferred subtler knives. She'd scroll through photos of friends' children, finance, medicine, law, and pause just long enough before asking when I planned to move up. The word hung there, heavy, accusing. I started inventing excuses, headaches, papers to grade, early mornings. Each skipped dinner bought me a week of peace. Jessica didn't see relief. She saw embarrassment. She said my absence made her look bad. When I told her why I avoided those nights, she shrugged and said, I took everything too personally. Said I needed thicker skin. Said her family was just joking. My mother noticed before I did. One afternoon after a quiet visit, she asked me a single question. No build-up, no softness, just asked if I was happy. I opened my mouth to say yes, and nothing came out. The silence stretched, unbearable. I admitted I wasn't sure, that sometimes it felt like my wife had married a future version of me she'd invented, and every day I failed to become him. My mother didn't argue, she just nodded, said that wasn't a marriage, said it was disappointment on a schedule. She was right, she always was. Year 2 sharpened everything. Jessica stopped hinting and started pushing. Job postings appeared in my messages like obligations: assistant principal, administrator, higher pay, better optics. I told her I liked the classroom, the kids. She told me liking something wasn't the same as being practical. She talked about houses we could finally afford if I stopped settling. She talked like my contentment was a flaw she needed to correct. Her income kept climbing. 6 figures turned into more. Instead of easing the pressure, it magnified it. She hated that she earned more, hated that I wasn't ashamed of it. Our arguments never exploded, they froze. She'd list everything we couldn't have because of me: neighborhoods, vacations, clubs with gates and waiting lists. I'd point out the numbers, the savings, the lack of debt. She'd stare past me like I'd missed the point entirely. Around then, my mother's health faltered. Heart disease. Early stage, they said. Not urgent, just concerning. Enough to change plans. Enough to rearrange weekends. My sister and I rotated visits, errands, appointments. It felt natural, necessary. Jessica hated it. Said I spent too much time there. Said my mother was capable. When I reminded her who'd carried us for decades, she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. The word stuck. 6 months ago, everything cracked. Jessica started coming home later, taking calls behind closed doors, keeping her phone face down. I noticed, but I didn't connect it. I was focused on hospital rooms and doctors' voices that lowered at the wrong moments. They told us my mother's heart was weaker than expected. Surgery might be necessary. My sister cried in the parking lot. I held it together long enough to call my wife. Her response was immediate, detached. She said my mother had lived a good life. Said at least she'd had time to get her affairs in order. Like she was already gone. Like she was an inconvenience being wrapped up. I told her she wasn't dying, just sick. Jessica didn't correct herself. She didn't apologize. That was when I started noticing the receipts. Restaurants I'd never been to. Amounts that didn't match lunches with colleagues. Dinners that ran late, paid for in quiet increments. Slips of paper that didn't explain themselves, but didn't need to, because suddenly everything else did. The charges kept appearing like fingerprints she forgot to wipe. Hotel rooms billed to our joint card, midweek, different locations. She explained them away without blinking. Client meetings that ran late, networking events that required privacy. Flowers ordered and delivered on days I never saw a vase. Receipts folded neatly, confidently, like she assumed I wouldn't look too closely. She was right, I knew. Of course I knew. But my head was already full of hospital corridors and test results, and the sound of machines breathing for someone I loved. I didn't have space for betrayal too, so I did something worse than confronting her. I went numb. I stopped asking where she was. Stopped caring who she was texting. Let the silence grow thick enough to hide in. My mother noticed anyway. One weekend while I was staying with her, she watched me from across the kitchen table. Long pause. Then she said it plainly without accusation or pity. Asked if my wife was cheating. I didn't bother lying, just lowered my eyes and nodded once. She asked what I planned to do. I told her I couldn't deal with it yet, that I needed her to get better first, that I couldn't survive two collapses at the same time. She reached across the table and wrapped her hand around mine. Her grip was weaker than it used to be, but steady. That was when she told me about the lawyer, about the planning, about the investments. She said she'd done better than I realized, said she wanted everything organized just in case. Promised my sister and me would be taken care of. Comfortable. Secure. She didn't give numbers, just said not to worry about money when the time came. I imagined something modest, helpful, a cushion. I had no idea. 3 months ago, she went into surgery. It technically went well. On paper, everything went right. Her body just didn't follow the plan. Weeks passed in fragments, beeping monitors, hospital lights that never dimmed. My sister and I traded shifts, sleeping in chairs, learning the rhythms of waiting. My wife visited twice. Both times she stayed less than an hour, barely looked up from her phone. The nurses thought she was a friend, not family, not my wife. Tuesday morning, my mother died with my hand in hers. She squeezed once, faintly, like she was passing something invisible to me. Whispered that I'd be okay. Better than okay. Then she was gone. The grief hollowed me out. I took time off work, my wife complained. Said I was wallowing, said we needed to get back to normal. Like my mother's death was a scheduling problem. The funeral was set for Saturday, the week blurred. Writing words I could barely read through tears. Choosing music my mother loved. My sister held herself together through sheer will. Her husband took care of everything else so she could grieve. My wife was absent. Claimed meetings, deadlines. Said my mother would understand that work came first. Friday night, she came home late again. I was lying awake staring at the ceiling when she sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped. The air shifted. I knew what was coming before she spoke. She said we needed to talk. She said she wasn't happy. Hadn't been for a long time. Said the marriage wasn't working, said divorce would be best, efficient, clean. She'd already spoken to a lawyer. Papers were being prepared. We could make it painless if we agreed. My mother had been dead for 4 days. I asked if this could wait until after the funeral. My voice sounded far away. She said honesty couldn't wait. Said the terms were simple. Prenup, split savings, figure out who moved out. I sat up and really looked at her. At the woman who chose this moment. I asked who he was. For a second, just one, her expression slipped. Then she recovered. Asked what I meant, denied everything, played confused. She thought I was too tired to see it. She was wrong. I didn't raise my voice when I said her name. I didn't need to. I told her I'd known for months, that I'd just been too exhausted to deal with betrayal while watching my mother fade away. Then I asked again, slowly this time, who he was. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the wall, at the door, anywhere but me. Then she shrugged like the truth was a minor inconvenience. Gave me his name, said he was a developer. Commercial real estate, successful, ambitious. Said they met through work. I asked how long. She asked if it mattered. I asked again. 8 months. The number landed hard. 8 months of hotel rooms and dinners and lies while I slept in hospital chairs and memorized the sound of failing machines. While my mother was dying. I didn't react the way she expected. I just nodded once. She filled the silence for me, explaining how he treated her the way she deserved, how he wanted more out of life, how he wasn't content staying small. She never said I failed her. She didn't have to. I told her we'd get divorced. That was fine. I asked again if we could wait until after I buried my mother to talk logistics. My voice cracked on the word buried. She said it was better to be honest now, better to be efficient. She stood, announced she'd sleep in the guest room, and said the papers would be ready by Monday. Then she left me alone in the dark. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how everything had collapsed so cleanly, how grief and betrayal had lined up without tripping over each other. The next morning, I dressed on autopilot. Suit. Notes folded into my pocket. Church doors already open when I arrived. My sister was there with her family, greeting people who came in waves. The pews filled fast. My mother had touched more lives than I ever knew. My wife arrived late. She slid into a back pew, eyes on her phone, not once looking in my direction. The service was gentle. The pastor spoke about kindness. My sister spoke about childhood memories. Then it was my turn. I stood and looked out at faces wet with tears. I talked about my mother's strength, her work ethic, the way she never complained, never demanded thanks, how she taught us what loyalty actually meant. 5 minutes in, movement caught my eye. My wife stood. She walked down the aisle, toward the exit. I stopped mid-sentence, watched her go. The entire room felt it. The shift, the confusion, the quiet shock. My sister's jaw tightened. People avoided looking at me. I swallowed and kept going. Finished the eulogy. Spoke about family, about showing up, about staying. No one missed the irony. At the cemetery, only family and close friends gathered. My wife didn't come. Didn't even pretend. I shook hands, accepted condolences, smiled when expected. I felt hollow, like something essential had already been buried. At the reception afterward, people shared stories and laughter crept back in carefully. I stood near the buffet, staring at food I couldn't taste when my phone vibrated. A message. "I'm in the parking lot. We need to talk now." I walked outside. She was leaning against her car holding a manila envelope, checking her watch like I was late. Impatient. Ready. Like this was just another appointment she wanted to finish before moving on. I realized then that she thought this was the end of the story. She had no idea it hadn't even started. She didn't bother lowering her voice. "Sorry to interrupt your day," she said, dripping impatience like I'd inconvenienced her by burying my mother. Then she held out the envelope. Thick. Manila. Final. "But I need you to sign these." I opened it. Divorce papers. Every line filled in. Tabs marking where my name was expected. She'd planned this, timed it, executed it with the same efficiency she used closing deals. I looked up at her. She didn't flinch. "You couldn't wait one more day," I said. My mouth felt dry. "You had to bring this to my mother's funeral." She exhaled like I was being dramatic. "Perfect timing, actually. One less thing to worry about now that she's gone. You won't be distracted taking care of her anymore. We can both move on." Something in me went completely quiet. She had just called my mother's death convenient. "Sign them," she said, already reaching for her keys. "Let's get this over with." And suddenly, I didn't want to argue. Didn't want explanations. Didn't want closure. I wanted it finished. So I did exactly what she didn't expect. I pulled out a pen, leaned against her car, signed every page. No reading, no negotiating. My signature bled slightly where my hand shook. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. She stared at me. "That's it?" she asked. "You're not going to fight this?" I capped the pen. "Why would I? You've been seeing someone else for 8 months. You just told me my mother dying was good timing. I'm not begging you to stay." I handed the folder back. She took it slowly, her expression tightening, not relieved, not triumphant. Disappointed, like she'd been denied a scene she was expecting. "I'll have my lawyer file these Monday," she said. "You should start looking for a new place. I'm keeping the apartment. I can afford it on my own." "Take it," I said. "Take whatever you want." She got into her car and drove off without looking back. I stood there in my funeral suit, gravel under my shoes, officially divorced on the day I buried my mother. That was rock bottom. Or so I thought. Monday afternoon, my sister and I sat in a quiet office that smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Her husband sat beside her, hands folded tight. The estate attorney, an older man with gentle eyes, offered condolences before opening a folder thicker than I expected. He explained my mother had updated her will 3 months earlier, right after surgery. right after she knew time wasn't guaranteed. He started with personal items, jewelry, photo albums, keepsakes. Then he paused and turned a page. Real estate, 3 properties, the house she lived in, 2 rentals purchased decades ago. Current combined value just over $1 million, to be split evenly. My sister and I looked at each other, stunned. Then he continued. Investment accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, a few newer assets she'd researched quietly. Total value, approximately $2.7 million, also to be split evenly. The room tilted. Life insurance, $500,000. Bank accounts totaling $400,000. Split evenly. He closed the folder and looked at us. After taxes and fees, he said, we were each inheriting a little over $2 million. I couldn't breathe. My sister was crying, hands over her mouth, shaking. Her husband wrapped an arm around her, eyes wide, and somewhere in my head, something else clicked into place. The prenup, the one she insisted on, the one designed to protect her family's money. The clause I remembered perfectly. Inheritances remained separate property. The lawyer wasn't finished. He cleared his throat and said my mother had left specific instructions. And that was the moment I realized my wife had made the most expensive mistake of her life. The lawyer didn't look at me when he said it. He said my mother had known about my marriage problems, said she'd been paying attention long before I admitted anything out loud. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name, my mother's handwriting. Clean, familiar, steady. He kept speaking while my hands hovered uselessly in my lap. She'd worked with him carefully, methodically. Every account, every property, every dollar structured, so that in the event of a divorce, nothing could be touched. Not challenged, not negotiated. Trusts layered with clauses written by someone who expected conflict and refused to lose. The prenup helped, but she hadn't relied on it alone. I broke the seal. The paper trembled between my fingers. My dearest son, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hate that I can't be there to hug you right now. I swallowed and kept reading. She wrote that she'd been watching. Not spying, watching. She saw the way my wife spoke to me, the way her family looked past me, the way I shrank myself to keep the peace. She wrote that love doesn't demand you become smaller so someone else can feel taller. That real love doesn't measure worth in income or ambition. She told me I was exactly who I was meant to be. A teacher, someone who mattered quietly, someone who changed lives without applause. She said she'd made sure I'd never have to choose between survival and dignity again, that I could stay where I belonged because I wanted to, not because I was trapped, that I could leave a marriage that hollowed me out without fear. And then the line that made my chest seize. She told me the prenup my wife insisted on was the best thing that ever happened to me, that not 1 cent of what she'd left could ever belong to her. She signed it the way she always signed cards, with love, with certainty. I read the letter 3 times. My sister leaned in, tears streaking her face, and then she laughed, a sound sharp and disbelieving. She said our mother had just executed the cleanest revenge imaginable. She wasn't wrong. I had signed the divorce papers that morning, under the assumption that I was walking away with nothing. Papers rushed through because my wife wanted it done before I could get ideas. Papers anchored to a prenup she thought protected her. She had no idea my mother had just handed me over $2 million and locked the door behind it. The lawyer cleared his throat again, said there was one more letter, this one addressed to my wife, to be delivered after the divorce was final. The next weeks blurred, estate paperwork, calls, meetings. My sister and I began the process of settling everything. Funds from liquid accounts started moving sooner than expected. Life somehow kept advancing. My phone filled with messages from my wife. Demands, deadlines. She needed me out by the end of the month. Said her new partner was moving in. Didn't bother pretending discretion mattered. I packed what was mine. Clothes, books, a laptop. I left everything else behind. Furniture, dishes, the remnants of a shared life that no longer felt like mine. I moved into a furnished rental within days. The divorce finalized quickly, no contest, no arguments, exactly as designed. When my lawyer called to confirm it was over, he asked how I felt. I told him the truth. I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I drove back to the apartment one last time. Knocked. The door opened to irritation. She told me I couldn't just show up anymore. I said I knew. Then I handed her the envelope. And for the first time since all of this began, I got to watch her read something she wasn't prepared for. I told her I just wanted to give her something. I handed her the envelope, the one with her name written in my mother's careful handwriting. She took it like it might bite her. "What is this?" "A letter," I said. "You should read it." I turned as if to leave, then stopped just far enough away. I wasn't going to miss this. Call it petty if you want. I'd earned the right to watch. Paper rustled, then nothing, no breath, no movement. Just silence so sharp it felt deliberate. Then a sound, small, strangled, like something caught in her throat. "Wait," she said. "Wait, what is this?" I turned back. She was standing frozen in the doorway, the letter shaking in her hands, all color drained from her face. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Your mom left you over $2 million?" "Yep." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Found out Monday, the day after you served me divorce papers at her funeral." Her mouth opened, closed. But you signed the papers. We're divorced." "Exactly," I said. "And thanks to the prenup you insisted on, every dollar is mine. Inheritances stay separate. Remember? You wanted to protect your family's money from me." Her hands trembled harder. "Turns out," I added, "it protected my mother's money from you." I watched it land. The math, the timing, the realization that she'd sprinted toward the exit without checking what she was leaving behind. She'd rushed the divorce, pushed for signatures, wanted it sealed before I could ever think about her income, her future, her world. Instead, she'd closed the door one day too early. "You knew," she said suddenly, accusing, desperate. "You knew when you signed." "No," I said. "I didn't. My mom never told me the numbers. The will reading was scheduled for Monday. You made me sign on Saturday. I had no idea." Her face flushed, red now, furious, panicking. "This isn't fair," she snapped. "We can contest this." "On what grounds?" I asked quietly. "You ambushed me at my mother's funeral. You called her death convenient. You had me sign in a parking lot. There's nothing to contest." I let the silence do the work. "I hear you're already living with him," I said. "Guess he's going to be disappointed when he finds out you're not nearly as wealthy as he thought." She stepped forward. "Wait, please. Let's talk about this. Maybe we made a mistake." "Oh, we did," I said. "You made one when you cheated. Another when you walked out of my mother's funeral. Another when you called her death-convenient timing." Her neighbor's door cracked open down the hall. She noticed and dropped her voice. "Please," she said. "We had good times. We can fix this." "We had good times when you thought I might become something else," I said. "The moment you realized I was happy being who I already was, you checked out." "That's not true." "It is," I said. "If my mom had left me nothing, you'd be celebrating this divorce, bragging about upgrading, but now that I'm suddenly worth something to you, you regret it." I pulled out my phone, opened the message she'd sent me that morning. "See this?" I asked. "This is what you said about my mother's death. Perfect timing. You didn't even pretend to care." Tears streamed down her face then. Real ones. Raw, uncontrolled. "I'm sorry," she said. "About everything." "I believe you," I said. "You're sorry you're not getting any of the money." Her face hardened. The tears stopped. And in that moment, standing there in the quiet hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Nothing pulling at me anymore. I turned and walked away without looking back. The tears stopped, just like that, like someone flipped a switch. And there she was again, the version I remembered too well. Her mouth tightened, her eyes sharpened, and the softness vanished. "So your mom must have been laughing while she wrote that will," she said coldly. "Setting up her son to screw over his wife. Ex-wife." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. "She wasn't screwing you over," I said. "She was protecting me. There's a difference." That was the moment whatever was left between us finally died. I turned and walked toward my car. Behind me, her voice kept changing. Apologies bleeding into accusations, regret twisting into anger. I didn't respond. I didn't slow down. I got in, shut the door, and drove away knowing I would never come back to that version of my life again. What came after felt unreal. Word spread fast. Small towns always feed on stories like this. Her parents found out about the inheritance within days. I heard they were furious, not at me, but at her for rushing the divorce, for not waiting, for not thinking. Her brother even called me, voice smooth, trying to float the idea of reconciliation. I told him she was already living with the other guy and sounded very confident in her choices. The call ended quickly. She tried harder. Calls I didn't answer. Emails that got longer and more emotional with every message. Pages explaining how she'd been confused, how the affair meant nothing, how love like ours deserved another chance. I forwarded every single one to my lawyer without replying. He laughed and said they were better than any protection we could have asked for, just in case she tried something. She didn't. Apparently, the other man found out about the inheritance, too. According to a chain of people who knew people, he left within days. Guess he wasn't interested in someone who'd just given up millions. Funny how ambition has limits. Her reputation took a hit after that. Turns out people don't love working with someone who serves divorce papers at a funeral. Clients quietly disappeared. Her parents started helping her financially while she rebuilt. The irony wasn't lost on me. My life went the opposite direction. Not explosively, calmly, intentionally. I didn't quit teaching because I hated it. I quit because I finally didn't have to compromise it. I started a small tutoring program for kids who actually needed help. Charged families what they could afford, sometimes nothing. I stopped worrying about test scores and started watching kids believe in themselves again. I bought a modest house, 3 bedrooms, yard, quiet street, paid cash, no debt, no noise, just space to breathe. My sister and I started a scholarship fund in our mother's name, full support for students from low-income backgrounds who wanted to teach. She would have loved that more than anything. I took the trip I'd always postponed. 3 weeks overseas. Got lost on purpose. Came back lighter, and I started dating again. Slowly. Met a woman at a community event. She loves her job. Makes about what I used to. Doesn't measure people by potential income. She doesn't know about the money, not yet, and she doesn't need to. 6 months after the divorce, her mother texted me, asked to meet for coffee, said she wanted to clear the air. I went, mostly out of curiosity. She ordered something complicated and expensive and didn't waste time. Said her daughter deeply regretted how things ended. Said she'd been under pressure. Said people make mistakes. I nodded, said she'd made many, starting with cheating for 8 months. Her lips pressed thin. She called that regrettable. Said what mattered was growth. Learning, I agreed. Good for her, I said. And for the first time, I meant it, because her growth no longer had anything to do with me. I stood up, wished her well, and walked out knowing something simple and permanent. Losing that marriage didn't ruin my life. It gave it back. She leaned forward, lowering her voice like we were negotiating something delicate. You and my daughter were good together before things got complicated, she said. Maybe if you both tried again? I didn't let her finish. You mean now that I have money? For the first time in that cafe, she looked uncomfortable. Not offended, exposed. I mean, she corrected carefully, now that certain financial stresses aren't a factor. I nodded once, slowly. They never were, not for me. I was happy with my salary, with my life. Jessica and your family were the ones who couldn't tolerate it. She tried different angles after that. Forgiveness, family, growth, second chances. I listened politely and declined every version of the same request. Eventually, the patience cracked. You're being vindictive, she snapped. You're punishing her for one mistake. One? I asked. Let's count. She cheated for 8 months. She belittled my work for 3 years. She walked out of my mother's funeral. She served me divorce papers at that funeral and called my mom's death convenient timing. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern. She pressed her lips together. Everyone deserves a second chance, she insisted. I gave her 3 years of them, I said. I'm done giving chances to people who don't respect me. That should have been the end. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I was locking up the tutoring center when someone knocked. I didn't need to open the door to know who it was. The silence had a weight to it. Can we talk? She asked when I let her in. Really talk. No lawyers, no family. I stayed where I was, didn't offer a seat. I'm not here for money, she said quickly. I know that's what you think. Then why are you here? To apologize. I waited. She took a breath, her hands twisted together. No audience, no leverage. I treated you terribly, she said. You were a good husband, kind, patient. I kept trying to turn you into someone else because I thought that's what success looked like. That was wrong. Yes, I said. It was. She nodded, absorbing it. What I did with him was inexcusable. I thought ambition meant upgrading people. It didn't. It was empty. I didn't argue. I didn't comfort her either. I appreciate the apology, I said, but it doesn't change anything. I know, she said quickly. I'm not asking for that. I just needed you to know I see what I threw away. Not the money, you, the person you are. She moved toward the door, stopped, then turned back. I hope you find someone who values you for exactly who you are. I already have, I said. That one landed. She smiled faintly, sad, genuine. You deserve that. At the door, she hesitated again, asked quietly if my mother had been right about her, if she'd seen through everything. My mom was good at reading people, I said. She nodded once, said she was sorry, even now. I think she knows, I said. She left. That was the last time I ever saw her. I heard later she moved to another city, a fresh start. I hope she found what she was chasing. As for me, life didn't explode into something flashy. It settled into something solid. I teach on my terms. I live in a house I own. I wake up next to someone who doesn't measure me in potential earnings. I carry my mother with me in quiet ways, and every once in a while I think back to that parking lot, that envelope, that moment she thought she was winning. Losing her didn't cost me anything. It gave me everything that actually mattered.